Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Carrington, Albert. So Albert Carrington, he's probably one of the least known apostles. He was actually in the first presidency under Brigham Young, which is why we're talking about him today. Otherwise, I would have put it off slightly. He was well known at the time for being very active in the perpetual immigration fund work. So he led a lot of groups of saints from Great Britain and Europe. But so that's probably what he's best known for inside the church. With the possible exception of his excommunication. So this was very unfortunate. I did a little bit of research back in the day, and I wrote an article about him, so we will get into my article as well, just to give you a better idea of what's going on. So I'm not going to use Wikipedia today. There are very, very few pictures of him. It's very difficult to find a picture of him. I found one good one, and unfortunately there wasn't really any better ones. And there's a picture in this article which is terrible. You can barely tell if it's a person. It's like the church is trying to forget that they ever trusted this guy. That's my impression. It's interesting to me because that hasn't happened with very many people, but there's a very small handful that it's really difficult to find information on. And it was before the church decided to go in the direction of transparency. So it's not like you can blame the church today for this. It's just, I'm not doing that at all. It's just that it's very, very difficult to find this information. I had to go to whole sorts of weird sources to figure out why he was excommunicated. So basically, we'll get into it when we get to that point, but basically Albert Carrington had committed adultery. And the church didn't know about it for years. Eventually, an apostate, somebody who had left the church, came forward and said that he was witness to some very inappropriate behavior by Albert Carrington, and hence after that, then they started looking into it, and that's when they discovered that he had committed adultery. So, it's really unfortunate. It's one of those, seriously, dude? Do you not know better? But, yeah, that's the situation here. What's more is he was a polygamist. So it's he had to have what he couldn't have, It's really weird. Anyways, frustrating is what it is. Anyway, so let's read the article and see what they mention here. It's pretty short, and then we'll look at my article, which is really quite, if I do say so myself, it's really quite well researched. So let's take a look. Carrington, Albert, a member of the Council of 12 Apostles from 1870 to 1885, and was born January 8, 1813 in Royalton, Windsor County, Vermont. He graduated at Dartmouth College in the class of 1833, and for 2 or 3 years subsequently taught school and studied law in Pennsylvania. So, as I mentioned, there's a picture. Here it is. It's terrible. Moving on. From that state, he removed to Wisconsin, where he engaged in lead mining until 1844. In July 1841, he joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Wyoto, Wisconsin, being baptized by William O. Clark, and on the abandonment of his business in 1844, gathered to Nauvoo. This was at the very crisis of the troubles then occurring there, and just previous to the martyrdom of the prophet. He was with the saints in their exodus, crossing the Mississippi River with his family February 9, 1846, thus being one of the first to start for the Rocky Mountains. From the camp on Sugar Creek, he went to Council Bluffs and was the following year a member of the pioneers who went to Great Salt Lake Valley. At the organization of the wards of Salt Lake City in February 1849, Elder Carrington was chosen as second counselor to Bishop Haywood of Ward No. 17, which position he held for about 6 years. When the Provisional State of Deseret was organized, he was elected assessor and collector. He also acted as the first clerk of the High Council in the Salt Lake Stake of Zion. He served as a member of Captain Stansbury's party, which surveyed Great Salt Lake, and was editor of the Deseret News from 1854 to 1859, and from 1863 to 1867. After the organization of Utah Territory, he was repeatedly elected a member of the Legislative Council until 1868, when he was sent to England to preside over the European mission. After his return to Utah in 1870, he was, July 30th, 1870, ordained one of the 12 apostles to fill the vacancy caused by the death of Ezra T. Benson. Later, he presided 3 times over the European mission, namely 1871 to 73, 1875 to 77, and 1880 to 1882. Yeah, he was quite well known for being very active with the European saints. From April 1873 until President Young's death, he acted as assistant counselor to the president of the church. There you go, counselor in the first presidency. And for more than 20 years, he was President Brigham Young's secretary. And having been appointed one of the administrators of President Young's estate, I don't know why they call it administrators, executors. He was an executor of the will. He labored in that capacity after the president's death until all the business connected with the estate was settled and the many difficulties adjusted. Yeah, and there were a lot. It was complicated. For refusing to comply with Judge Borman's unjust demands, he was imprisoned in the Utah Penitentiary from the 4th to the 28th of August, 1879, together with George Buchanan and Brigham Young, Jr. Some years before his death, he fell into transgression, which, when it came to light, resulted in his excommunication from the church November 7th, 1885, and they won't even tell you what it is. Gosh. This action was taken by the Quorum of the Apostles after a thorough examination of his case. That is true. Albert Carrington died in Salt Lake City, Utah, September 19th, 1899. Sometime previous to his demise, he was permitted to renew his covenant by baptism, and thus he died as a member of the church. Yeah. He was rebaptized, and I don't know who authorized that. I mean, obviously, heads of the church, but there are not very many specifics about it, and that's very frustrating to me. See also Historical Record, Volume 7, page 243. But the thing is, most of the other articles we've read so far, there have been multiple sources. There have been lots of information. It's been easy to find what you were looking for. This one, there just isn't. There are very, very few sources. And so, yeah, I had to really delve into the world of different historical records to find anything about this guy. There is a decent picture. Thank you, Wikipedia, for the decent picture. The church doesn't have one, and it's very frustrating. Anyway, this is Albert Carrington. I mean, you can see him in the background, but yeah. So there is also a very short blurb in Volume 4 about him, and it just has to do with that he was one of the original pioneers and stuff. But yeah, we knew that already. So, my own research and opinion, I liked to choose a scripture that I felt goes well with this person's biography, and this one is Luke 22:40. Pray that ye enter not into temptation. Yeah? So, he was ordained 3 July 1870 at age 57 by Brigham Young. He was excommunicated 7 November 1885 and rebaptized in 1887 sometime. So, biography. Albert Carrington was born 8 July 1813 in Royalton, Windsor County, Vermont, to Daniel Van Carrington and Isabella Bowman. Little is known about his early life other than the fact that he received an above-average education. He graduated Dartmouth College in 1833 and taught school and studied law in Pennsylvania. See, it's very sketchy at the beginning. He later moved to Wisconsin, where he was involved in lead mining. He was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints there in 1841 and married Rhoda Maria Woods the following year. He abandoned his business in Wisconsin in 1844 and moved to join the Saints in Nauvoo, Illinois, arriving shortly before the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith. They mentioned that in the article. Elder Carrington described himself as one who was naturally more prone to reflection than to speaking, yet he was happy in aiding so far as he could to promote the interests of the kingdom of God. Carrington, Deseret News, 1859, yeah? Elder Carrington had a strong testimony of the divinity of the calling of the prophet Joseph Smith. He knew for himself that the work we were engaged in was true, that Joseph Smith was a prophet of the living God, and that Brigham Young was his legal successor and also a prophet of the living God, and the contradiction of all the world would not invalidate those great truths. He also spoke of the founding of the work of the Latter-day Saints by the prophet Joseph Smith, showing that the Lord undoubtedly operated through him. So, this quote is a synopsis of one of his talks. So that's why it sounds very third person. But at the time, they were people taking notes and then compiled them afterwards. It wasn't word for word. So that's the best we got. Brother Carrington was involved in the exodus from Nauvoo, being one of the first groups to cross the Mississippi River. He unfortunately lost 3 of his 4 children in the exodus. It's crazy. He was in one of the lead groups to enter the Great Salt Lake and subsequently returned to bring his family to the Rocky Mountains in 1848. Even after being persecuted along with his fellow saints, he said he had no bitter feelings against his persecutors, as he believed they did it in their ignorance. I'm going to skip the reference, but you can see it up here. Around this time, but at an undocumented date, Albert married Mary Ann Rock, having been one of the few members asked to practice plural marriage before it was announced to the body of the church a few years later. At the organization of the Salt Lake City into wards in 1849, Brother Carrington was chosen as second counselor to Bishop Haywood of Ward number 17, a position he held for 6 years. When the Provisional State of Deseret was organized, he was elected assessor and collector, as well as first clerk of the High Council in the Salt Lake State. He spoke a couple of times in General Conference in the capacity of assessor and collector before his call to the 12. In October 1861, he was called upon to read an address calling upon the bishops to use their best efforts to husband the tithing in their hands to allow the maximum amount possible to go toward the building of the temple. Now, considering that he didn't actually write that, he just read it aloud, it wasn't super important, but it was important that he was asked to read it. Yeah? It's kind of an honor that he was asked that. Brother Carrington served twice as editor of the Deseret News, first occupying the position in March 1854 following the death of Willard Richards. He served in this capacity until March 1859, yet returned as editor once more from 1863 until 1867. After the organization of Utah Territory, he was repeatedly elected a member of the council until 1868, when he was sent to England to preside over the European mission, succeeding Apostle Franklin D. Richards. He returned to Utah the summer of 1870, only days before his call as one of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, on 3 July 1870, filling the vacancy caused by the death of Elder Ezra T. Benson. The following year, in April 1871, he was called to serve as church historian, replacing Apostle George A. Smith in that position. He served in this capacity until May of 1874, being replaced by Apostle Orson Pratt. Simultaneous to his call as church historian, he was called to serve again as president of the European Mission from 1871 to 1873. His main duty, besides supervising the preaching of the gospel, was to prepare the saints to gather to Zion. He was very involved in the emigration of the saints. This topic occupied his mind often, and he encouraged those with means to support the poor desiring to emigrate to Utah. In 1873, Elder Carrington was called to serve as assistant counselor to President Brigham Young, along with Lorenzo Snow, Brigham Young Jr., John W. Young, and George Buchanan. He also served as Brigham Young's personal secretary. He was called to serve as president of the European Mission a third time in 1875 to 1877, again using his talents with money to help the European saints emigrate to Utah. Elder Carrington enjoyed the trust and intimacy of President Young for as long as they knew each other. The following anecdote, told by Brigham Young, illustrates the intimacy of their friendship. It is the best looking of anything in the world when Brother Carrington sees his wife in her new calico dress. You look just as you did when I courted you. Upon the death of President Brigham Young in 1877, Elder Carrington, Elder George Buchanan, and his son, Elder Brigham Young Jr., served as executors of the vast Young estate. Rumors abounded that the estate was worth many millions of dollars. It took several months of dedication, but the 3 executors came to the conclusion that the estate was worth about $1.6 million. Much of the property was actually church property, over $1 million worth, and thus would not be going to Brigham Young's progeny. This so disappointed some of the heirs of Brigham Young's estate that they filed a complaint against the executors. The anti-Mormon judge Jacob S. Borman ruled in favor of the heirs, and held the executors in contempt of court. Great. Elder Cannon, Young, and Carrington spent 3 weeks in the Utah Territorial Penitentiary before the Territorial Supreme Court reversed the decision. Thank goodness. The church then decided to grant the heirs an additional $75,000 to settle the case. So, I mean, I've heard about this, and it's so ridiculous. Like, you're suing the executors? The people are making the decision whose property it was, but like, dude, that's not helpful. And how in the world does the court rule in their favor? You know? I don't know. Like, they can sue for more money, but they're not going to, like, put the executors in prison. Like, what the executors do? You know? They're not hurting anyone. It's weird. In 1880, Elder Carrington was called to serve as president of the European Mission for the 4th time, making him one of the longest-serving presidents of the European Mission, a total of 8 years. Now, I read this article that I'm going to mention, but I don't think I quoted it, so just know it's not great what the person accused him of. Elder Carrington was accused of unseemly conduct by the largely anti-Mormon Salt Lake Tribune, being a rival paper of the Deseret News, of which Elder Carrington had been an editor, so they thought it was in, like, you know, revenge or retaliation or something like that. You know, the first presidency found that there was some truth to the accusations and brought Elder Carrington before them in a disciplinary court. The Deseret News published this account of it. Charges have been preferred against Albert Carrington. A full and patient hearing was had before the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, when the following decision was unanimously adopted: that Albert Carrington be excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the crimes of lewd and lascivious conduct and adultery. Yeah, lovely, right? It was signed by all the members of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12. He was excommunicated on 7 November 1885. This was the only publication from the church on the subject. Yeah, like, he basically disappeared from history. It was really weird. 2 years after his excommunication, he was rebaptized and died a member of the church on 19 September 1889 following a 4-year paralysis from 2 strokes. I'm going to skip the quotes from him, although some of them are really interesting. So if you are interested, go back and read them. So here's my conclusion. What kind of man was Albert Carrington? He was a man with many good qualities. He loved the people. He gave a lot of effort to bring his fellow saints across the plains to gather to Utah. He bore no malice against those who had wronged him. He was a great administrator. He served in the territory legislature. He was an executor of Brigham Young's estate. He understood the law, yet he felt himself an exception to the law and fell. He was not a perfect man, yet he was a good man. The greatest lesson we can take from Elder Carrington's story was taught so eloquently by George Buchanan. The church has been taught from the beginning that no amount of talent, no number of gifts, no eminence in the priesthood were sufficient to save a man or to keep him in the church without personal purity. Yeah? It's a great quote. There is an unfortunate silence on the subject of Elder Carrington's rebaptism, and while it is impossible to know how he felt or what road led him to return to church activity, even though he would never again serve as an apostle, it is a gratifyingly short process. 2 years after being excommunicated for sexual sins, Elder Carrington was able to show that he had completely repented and had his blessings restored. This is indicative of his dedication to the Lord and his desire to be obedient. So, I mean, it is and it isn't. I don't know. I'm a little bit of two minds on that one, because it could also have just been a very sympathetic, authority person over him, you know? If I think it's his stake president, if he had agreed to it, it has to be given a nod, you know, by First Presidency, I believe, after you've been excommunicated. But, like, I think that if they recommended it enough, that they could eventually get that recommendation. Plus the fact that he was paralyzed at the time, so it's not like he's going to be out, you know, doing things against anyone's will. Not that he ever did. The thing is, like, he committed adultery, but from what I understand, it was definitely consensual. So here's like a quick synopsis of what I read back in the day from the actual article in the Salt Lake Tribune, and it was that basically he had chosen a woman from England that he wanted to marry as one of his, many wives, and he had basically lived with her as if they were married, and then they didn't get married. I don't know for what reason. They broke up, yeah? And that's basically what happened. So that's why I say he was a good person. But he felt himself an exception to the law. And that's why I mentioned that. And he's like, no, we're exceptions. So here, I mentioned it during his quotes. It says, over time, Elder Carrington's concept of law began to shift. Instead of focusing on the constitutionality of a law, he began to measure everything by the laws of God. He said, what is crime? Simply a transgression of the law, human or divine. What is law? It is or should be a rule of order founded in justice for the benefit of those to whom it may apply. Now, so far as we're concerned in regard to law, we are under divine law, the gospel, the plan of salvation, a law that is perfect, plain, and simple, as well as just, and applicable to the whole human family at all times, and in this we should rejoice. But we are also under human laws as well. We pertain to a number of what are termed human governments, subject in a greater or less degree to man-made institutions. And are they perfect? No. Now then, with regard to these matters that we are immediately passing through, the attempted enforcement of laws that are not constitutional, and though not being constitutional, that are not valid, and consequently of no force or effect whatever in justice. What are we going to do about it? I trust that we will endure meekly and patiently in all things. That's the only clue I have as to why he felt like he could do this. And so basically at the time, because of the Edmunds Law, is what he was referring to. The Edmunds Law was an anti-polygamy law that put polygamists into prison. And they considered it unconstitutional. The reason being is that they considered marriage to be a part of their religion, and because there was a separation of the church and state, they didn't feel that the government had a right to step in, even write a law, and even pass a law that has to do with marriage. They felt that that was unconstitutional because of the separation of church and state, and that we have religious freedom in this country and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's the argument. And so when he's talking about law here, I believe he's talking about that. But it felt like, and so people, a lot of general authorities at the time preached that it was important to follow God's law more than man's law. It is important to follow man's law, but it's more important to follow God's law, and therefore we are exempt, basically, from this law. And I think that attitude of the time really affected Albert Carrington. And, I just find that interesting. So, that is my opinion on how that happened. And here's something that George Q. Cannon said about him. Perhaps it is not too much to say that no man in the church has had better advantages in many respects for the time he has been a member than has Albert Carrington. He was a college graduate, and he joined the church at a time when men possessing such advantages were not so common as now. He came here with the pioneers, and his education enabled him to take a prominent part in public affairs. President Young showed him great confidence, and their association was long and intimate. He cannot therefore plead ignorance as an excuse for his wrongdoing. The acts for which he has been dealt with were the deliberate violations on his part of principles and laws which he has heard taught by the lips of inspiration ever since he gathered with the saints, and in direct conflict with every example which he has seen on the part of the leaders of Israel. Yeah. It's frustrating. It's frustrating is what it is. Also, there is a very brief mention of him in an epistle of the first presidency from 1886, April 1886. So that was right around the time he was excommunicated. I think it's just this one paragraph. It is kind of a long paragraph, but this was a mention during General Conference shortly after his excommunication. At this point, it may not be improper to again solemnly warn the officers and members of the Church against all conduct that tends to immorality and unchastity. We are being continually, though most falsely, accused of teaching and practicing sexual vice under the garb of religion. No charge could be more utterly false, for no system of philosophy, no code of ethics, no articles of religion since the world was first peopled ever taught more strictly and emphatically than does the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints the paramount necessity of personal purity in the relation of the sexes. Of this the saints are well aware. Let us see to it, then, that our actions correspond with our faith, for we may rest assured that no prominence of position, no ties of family, no influence of wealth can save us from the penalty if we break the law of God in this regard. But a few weeks ago, it became the sad duty of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles to sever from the communion of the saints one of its members, who had violated the law of chastity. He was a man of education, of experience, of judgment, of long standing in the church, but neither these nor his exalted position in the priesthood could save him from the penalty of the law he had so flagrantly broken. And as with him, so with all others, the law must be administered by the officer of the church with justice and impartiality, with malice toward none, but with due regard to the commandments of God and the honor of his holy name. Hear it, O house of Israel, ye who are seeking to attain to the celestial kingdom of our Father. None but the pure in heart can see God. None but those who have sanctified all their affections and passions by entire and complete subservience to his laws can dwell in his eternal presence. Let us also remember that the condition of a community as a whole depends upon the conditions of the individuals composing it. As are its component parts, so is it in its entirety. If the individual members of a people are wise, just, intelligent, honest, honorable, and pure, that community will be distinguished among its fellows by those peculiar views. To apply the lesson to ourselves, each one for himself, it is, if we wish to see the Church of Christ prepared as a bride for the Savior, we must, individually, live our religion and exemplify in our own lives those virtues which we know must adorn the bride before she can enter the presence of her Lord. This matter of personal purity, faith, diligence, and good works is one that we cannot delegate to our neighbor, or place on the shoulders of other men and women, but we must do his own duty, each bear his own responsibilities, each set his own house in order, each magnify his calling, each live near unto God if he expects to draw nigh unto him. I think that's a very eloquently put. But that is the only mention of this incident from the First Presidency. They don't ever mention it again. Ever. And it's really interesting to me that it was just so, it was like, we're disappointed, we're shaking our heads, we'll mention it briefly, that's it. We're never talking about it again. And yeah, I feel like that's almost a little bit sad because Elder Carrington, served for years faithfully in the church, and then, he had an affair. It's frustrating. It's frustrating is what it is. But yeah, as they mentioned, he had no excuses. He knew exactly what he was doing. And because of that, nobody gave him any quarter, didn't deserve any. There's no pleading ignorance on that point. You knew better, and you didn't do better. Anyways, I hope you found this interesting, at least. I feel like an article on Albert Carrington is definitely needed. So if you never knew who he was quite prominent in his day. Yeah. In the 1870s, he was very, very well known, even up to the mid-1880s. But yeah, and then he fell from grace. So I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.